Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change, the most important and pressing news story facing humanity right now. This should be the top news story of every single news report, every single night of every single year, month, week. Every single night we should be talking about climate change and what it means to humanity and how it is that we might be able to fix it, avoid it, avert it, turn the tide somehow. But apparently there seem to be a lot of people that don't believe that climate change is real, which is amazing to me. This is the downside of ideological groupthink, tribal thought patterns, is that everybody in one camp that believes the very true story that what the mainstream media is telling us is mostly lies. They want to include climate change in there as mostly lies, and that is not true, because they are not actually looking for evidence. They're not looking at the evidence. They're not actually receiving the overwhelming abundance of evidence displaying that climate change is actually happening. So for those that deny that climate change is happening, or that it's a made-up story or whatever, are they making up the fact that high tides are happening in Miami or in Hawaii or in other places in the world? Are they faking this somehow? It's actually happening and they're not faking it. So explain to me how that's a fake. Explain to me how there's been very, very little snowfall on the western mountains of the United States of America this year. Are they faking that? Are they making that up? Are they doing it to us on purpose because they're trying to what? What are they trying to do? What are they explaining? What's the purpose behind that? What's the purpose behind causing a drought and possibly major crop losses in the United States? Are they making up that, sea ice is being lost? There's actually a few people that get on this channel and tell me that, sea ice has never been bigger than it ever has. No, no, that's not true. They are not making this up. They're not fudging the numbers. They're not trying to pull a fast one on you. They're not trying to, tax you because of climate change. Indeed, carbon credits are bullshit. They're full of shit. They're a scam. They're not going to help climate change. And they certainly are all about money. But that doesn't mean that climate change is not real. This is just some bogus bullshit way for them to somehow act like they're doing something about climate change economically. What else? Are they making up that coral bleaching is happening? No, they're not. It's just a really hard thing to fake. Are they making up hurricanes? Multiple, category 5 and 4 and 3 hurricanes in one year. And what's the purpose if they are doing this? What is the point of this? What else are they, I know that a lot of people think that they're setting fires, directed energy weapons, that they're making these fires happen so they could destroy homes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There have been a record number of wildfires just this year in the United States alone. We're not even talking about Portugal and Spain. We're not talking about where else have they had fires? I want to say like in like Croatia area, other places in Europe, they've been having wildfires. South America, I believe, has had some crazy wildfires going on in the last couple of years. But just in the United States alone, We've had amazing record-breaking wildfires. We've had wildfires all winter. Definitely out of wildfire season. We've had wildfires in Los Angeles in winter, or in the Los Angeles area. Definitely out of season. I just, again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for people to be setting these fires or making these fires happen. It does not compute. So, to sum up my weird rambling beginning to this story, I just, I really wish that climate deniers, I say go for it. Please bring me some evidence that, somehow this is fake and a fraud, like real evidence, not just some old dude on a YouTube channel, with some very, very shaky science, like three guys can't, undo all of the science and all of the evidence that thousands of scientists are bringing us every day. So just, bring me something credible. I'm willing to have an open mind, but please bring me something credible. Most science deniers don't understand some basic physics and basic science, and so therefore a lot of their arguments don't hold anything close to logic. I heard some right-wing guy trying to explain away climate science, and it was just like the most doofus, like fifth grade understanding of physics, even less than fifth grade. It was just really badly thought out, an understanding of what climate science is and climate change is, and what carbon in the atmosphere, excess carbon means for us, how the mechanism works, how carbon dioxide creates heating, how methane creates heating. There are other trace gases in the air, how water vapor creates heating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm looking forward to all of the evidence you're going to bring me, guys. Bring it on. So to get into actually more articles about why it is that we are in big, big trouble. So many people sent me this same article, I figured that I would have to read it. I don't know, like 4 different people sent me this article. And I actually saw this in some other news outlet. This is from The Guardian, and the title is "We're Doomed. Mayor Hillman on the climate reality no one else will dare mention," by Patrick Barkham. The 86-year-old social scientist says accepting the impending end of most life on Earth might be the very thing needed to help us prolong it. "We're doomed," says Mayor Hillman, with such a beaming smile that it takes a moment for the words to sink in. "The outcome is death, and it's the end of most life on the planet because we're so dependent on the burning of fossil fuels. There are no means of reversing the process, which is melting the polar ice caps, and very few appear to be prepared to say so." Hillman, an 86-year-old social scientist and senior fellow emeritus of the Policy Studies Institute, does say so. His bleak forecast of the consequence of runaway climate change, he says, without fanfare, is his last will and testament. His last intervention in public life. "I'm not going to write any more because there's nothing more that can be said," he says when I first hear him speak to a stunned audience at the University of East Anglia late last year. From Malthus to the Millennium Bug, apocalyptic thinking has a poor track record. This is very true, but when it issues from Hillman, it may be worth paying attention. Over nearly 60 years, his research has used factual data to challenge policymakers' conventional wisdom. In 1972, he criticized out-of-town shopping centers more than 20 years before the government changed planning rules to stop their spread. In 1980, he recommended halting the closure of branch line railways, only now are some closed lines reopening. In 1984, he proposed energy ratings for houses, finally adopted as a government policy in 2007. And more than 40 years ago, he presciently challenged society's pursuit of economic growth. When we meet at his converted coach house in London, his classic Dawes racer still parked hopefully in the hallway. A stroke and a triple heart bypass mean he is currently forbidden from cycling. Hillman is anxious we are not sidetracked by his best-known research, which challenged the supremacy of the car. With the doom ahead, making a case for cycling as the primary mode of transport is almost irrelevant, he said. We've got to stop burning fossil fuels. So many aspects of life depend on fossil fuels, except for music and love and education and happiness. These things which hardly use fossil fuels are what we must focus on. That is a beautiful sentence right there, or a couple of sentences. While the focus of Hillman's thinking for the last quarter century has been on climate change, he is best known for his work on road safety. He spotted the damaging impact of the car on the freedoms and safety of those without one, most significantly children, decades ago. Some of his policy prescriptions have become commonplace, such as 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, but we failed to curb the car's crushing of children's liberty. In 1971, 80% of British 7- and 8-year-old children went to school on their own. Today, it's virtually unthinkable that a 7-year-old would walk to school without an adult. Interesting. As Hillman has pointed out, we've removed children from danger rather than removing danger from children, and filled roads with polluting cars on school runs. He calculated that escorting children took 900 million adult hours in 1990, costing the economy £20 billion each year. It will be even more expensive today. Our society's failure to comprehend the true cost of cars has informed Hillman's view on the difficulty of combating climate change. Excuse me. But he insists that I must not present his thinking on climate change as an opinion. The data is clear. The climate is warming exponentially. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that the world on its current course will warm by 3°C by 2100. Recent revised climate modeling suggests a best estimate of 2.8°C, but scientists struggle to predict the full-time impact of the feedbacks from future events, such as methane being released by melting of the permafrost. Hillman is amazed that our thinking rarely stretches beyond 2100. This is what I find so extraordinary when scientists warn that the temperature would rise to 5°C or 8°C. What? And stop there? What legacies are we leaving for future generations? In the early 21st century, we did as good as nothing in response to climate change. Our children and grandchildren are going to be extraordinarily critical. Global emissions were static in 2016, but the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was confirmed as beyond 400 parts per million, the highest level for at least 3 million years. I think it's now about 412. Concentrations can only drop if we emit no carbon dioxide whatsoever, said Hillman. Even if the world went zero carbon today, that would not save us because we've gone past the point of no return. Although Hillman has not flown for more than 20 years as part of a personal commitment to reducing carbon emissions, he is now scornful of individual action, which he describes as good as futile. By the same logic, says Hillman, national action is also irrelevant because Britain's contribution is minute. Even if the government were to go to zero carbon, it would make almost no difference. Instead, said Hillman, the world's population must globally move to zero emissions across agriculture, air travel, shipping, heating homes, every aspect of our economy, and reduce our human population too. Can it be done without collapse of civilization? I don't think so, says Hillman. Can you see everyone in a democracy volunteering to give up flying? Can you see the majority of population becoming vegan? Can you see the majority agreeing to restrict the size of their families? Hillman doubts that human ingenuity can find a fix and says there is no evidence that greenhouse gases can be safely buried. But if we adapt to a future with less, focusing on Hillman's love of music, it might be good for us. And who is we? Asked Hillman with a typically impish smile. Wealthy people will be better able to adapt, but the world's population will head to regions of the planet, such as Northern Europe, which will be temporarily spared the extreme effects of climate change. How are these regions going to respond? We see it now. Migrants will be prevented from arriving. We will let them drown. A small band of artists and writers, such as Paul Kingsnorth's Dark Mountain Project, highly recommend checking him out, have embraced the idea that civilization will soon end in an environmental catastrophe, but only a few scientists, usually working beyond the patronage of funding bodies and nearing the end of their own lives, have suggested as much. Is Hillman's view of a consequence of old age and ill health? I was saying these sorts of things 30 years ago when I was hale and hearty, he said. Hillman accuses all kinds of leaders, from religious leaders to scientists to politicians, of failing to honestly discuss what we must do to move to zero carbon emissions. I don't think they can, because society isn't organized to enable them to do so. Political parties' focus is on jobs and GDP, depending on the burning of fossil fuels. Without hope, goes the truism, we will give up. And yet optimism about the future is wishful thinking, says Hillman. He believes that accepting that our civilization is doomed could make humanity rather like an individual who recognizes he is terminally ill. Such people rarely go on a disastrous binge. Instead, they do all they can to prolong their lives. Can civilization prolong its life until the end of the century? Depends on what we are prepared to do. He fears it will be a long time before we take proportionate action to stop climate calamity. Standing in the way is capitalism. Can you imagine the global airline industry being dismantled when hundreds of new runways are being built right now all over the world? It's almost as if we're deliberately attempting to defy nature. We're doing the reverse of what we should be doing, with everybody's silent acquiescence and nobody's batting an eyelid. Indeed. Madness is what people might call it. Some people want to call it insane. We seem to be defiant in the face of logic, which I will describe that as stupidity. Actually, defiance in the face of logic is stupidity. Defiance for defiance sake is petulance. A bunch of little brats we are. Again, climate deniers. Hello. The military paid for a study on sea level rise. The results were scary. So the military has been studying climate change for years. Do you want to explain that one, climate deniers? Do you want to explain all the reports that the military has put out on climate change? Do you want to explain all the intelligence that they have on climate change, all of the information they have on climate change? They are the leaders. Oh, patriots, oh, right wing, oh, conservatives, oh, lovers of the military. They are the leaders in climate change studies. Do you want to explain that one? You want to tell me if they're fudging the numbers? Is the military making this up? Is this something they're just doing? What? Why are they doing this? They're actually doing it for national defense. They're doing it for defense purposes. They're not doing it for the economy or, to try and foist carbon budgets on us. So yes, explain that one, please. The military paid for a study on sea level rise. The results were scary. April 25th, by Chris Mooney and Brady Dennis. More than 1,000 low-lying tropical islands risk becoming uninhabitable by the middle of the century. And God, they use some realistic timelines, or possibly sooner. There you go, because of rising sea levels, upending the populations of some island nations and endangering key U.S. military assets, according to new research published Wednesday. The threats to the islands are twofold. In the long term, the rising seas threaten to inundate the islands entirely. More immediately, As seas rise, the islands will more frequently deal with large waves that crash farther onto the shore, contaminating their drinkable water supplies with ocean salt water, according to the research. The islands face climate change-driven threats to their water supplies in the very near future, quote unquote, according to the study published in the journal Science Advances. The study focuses on part of the Marshall Islands in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Hilda Hine, president of the Marshall Islands, said in an interview that Wednesday's journal article brings home the seriousness of the predicament facing her island nation. It's a scary scenario for us, she said. The research also has ramifications for the U.S. military, whose massive Ronald Reagan ballistic missile defense test site sits in part on the atoll island of Roy Namur, a part of the Marshall Islands and the focus of the research. The U.S. military supported the research in part to learn about the vulnerability of its tropical island installations. The Pentagon base of Roy Namur, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and surrounding islands supports about 1,250 American civilians, contractors, and military personnel. This study provided a better understanding of how atoll islands may be affected by climate change, Defense Department spokeswoman Heather Babb said in a statement. While no decisions have been made about Department of Defense activities on the islands based on the study, DoD continues to focus on ensuring its installations and infrastructure are resilient to a wide range of threats. The department's understanding of rising sea levels will enable the military services and agencies in affected areas to make informed decisions on how to continue to execute their missions. The low-lying island, which rises barely 6 feet above the current sea level, is part of the vast Kwajalein Coral Atoll, a structure that formed as coral reefs grew around a sinking volcanic island long ago. That is the origin of more than 1,000 other low-lying ring-shaped atoll islands or atoll island chains across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Most are not populated, but some, such as the Marshall Islands and the Maldives, are home to tens of, or even hundreds of thousands. While seas are rising by 3.2 millimeters per year at the moment and expected to rise even faster in years ahead, Roy Namur has a good chance of avoiding total inundation this century. But the new research conducted by researchers from U.S. Geological Survey, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and several other institutions in the United States, Monaco, and the Netherlands suggests that saltwater contamination of the island's aquifers would probably occur at 40 centimeters, about 15 inches of sea level rise. A rise of 5 to 6 centimeters globally has already occurred since 2000, and the sea level rise is even faster at the Kwajalein Atoll. The danger comes because of the increasing ability of large waves to spill across the island and sink into its groundwater. Historically, there would be an overwash event due to a cyclone or typhoon every 20 or 30 years, said Kurt Storlazzi, a USGS researcher who led the study. Every 20 or 30 years or more, communities can recover in that time. The concern is that with sea level rise, those flooding events are going to happen more frequently, like every year. Wave overwash events already occur. A 20-foot high wave swept across Roy Namur in 2014. But the computer model used by the study finds that they become more likely as seas rise. And once they occur 2 years in a row, the groundwater could become undrinkable. The tipping point in the study varies depending upon the rate of climate change and above all the stability of Antarctica. In the worst case, the paper says it could come before 2030. However, a prominent expert in sea level rise who was not involved in the study, Bob Kopp of Rutgers University, questioned that especially dire finding. Sure. They're asking the right questions, they're doing the right sorts of analysis, but I'm a little skeptical of some of their early century dates for some things, Kopp said in an interview with the Washington Post. But considering, this is me adding this, considering the faster than expected news that seems to be happening every single day, let's see how long Bob Kopp keeps his skepticism going. For less dire scenarios, the critical moment is pushed further off to the decade between 2030 or 2040. for a high warming scenario without Antarctic collapse, or 2055 to 2065 for a middle range warming scenario. Kopp said that the middle scenario is consistent with what is known and provided an analysis suggesting that while there is indeed a major threat, it won't arrive as soon as 2030, but could be by the 2050s. But why not act like it's 2030, Bob? You know, why not act like it? Just to get ahead of the game, get ahead of the curve a little bit, possibly. Even if you take their most conservative scenario, the numbers are really disturbing, Kopp said, and there's nothing wrong with their conservative scenario. Dorlazi said that, if anything, Roy Namur is probably somewhat higher in elevation than many other coral atoll islands, hence the conclusion that so many of them could be at risk. The study says that most are, and that the occupied ones might also, in the relatively near future, have to worry about their drinking water supplies. The research was commissioned by the Pentagon's Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, published in a more lengthy form earlier this year. In a report that partly focused on helping the military identify sites where its assets could be vulnerable. There, the researchers called the inquiry on Roy Namur a precursor to a comprehensive examination of numerous atoll islands managed by the Defense Department excuse me, that are most vulnerable to sea level rise and associated impacts over the next 20 to 50 years. If these impacts are not addressed or adequately planned for, as it becomes necessary to abandon or relocate island nations, significant geopolitical issues could arise, they wrote. The United States manages military installations or assets not only in the Marshall Islands, but also on Wake Island, another Pacific atoll, and the Diego Garcia Atoll in the Indian Ocean. There are also decommissioned installations at the Midway and Johnson atolls. John Conger, director of the Center for Climate and Security and former acting assistant secretary of defense for energy, installations, and the environment, said that the department is increasingly cognizant of threat of sea level rise on its installations. Part of the risk can be addressed by adaptive measures, he said, but that's costly. He called the new study a little bit jarring. They are going to have to make some operational decisions, Conger said. This is sort of the front lines of sea level rise and climate change. It's not that the entire island is going underwater. It's that you don't have drinking water. It's going to wreck the aquifer. Rising seas threaten even some projects that remain under construction. Case in point, the $1 billion space fence, a radar installation on the Kwajalein Atoll that is intended to track tens of thousands of pieces of space junk, some of them as small as a baseball, in an effort to keep orbiting satellites and astronauts safe. The state-of-the-art project is being constructed by the Air Force, by Lockheed Martin, and is supposedly to be fully operational later this year. Sorry, y'all, I'm a little bit behind on my water intake today, and it's totally affecting me negatively. So the space fence is supposed to be fully operational later this year, but its location on the tiny atoll already has raised concerns that the site could face routine flooding threats within a matter of decades and that salt water could damage its expensive equipment. The study underscores why many small island nations clamored to ensure that the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement included language requiring the world to strive to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, an extremely stringent target. Atoll-dependent nations that have been heavily involved in the push for climate action include the Marshall Islands, Maldives, Kiribati, and Tuvalu. This article just goes on and on. I don't think I'm going to read the whole thing because I'm deep into this video already, but you guys get the idea. What's interesting is that the military has these, studies, commissions these studies, reports about climate change, and they're fully aware, and they totally know what's going on, and they're, preparing for the effects of it. but they don't seem to care about the effects of their actual activities on the, you know, is the military going to study itself, its own activities, and, you know, have come to some conclusion about that? Because it seems like, you know, the military has carte blanche to do whatever it is they need to do, you know, for security, right? But they, you know, so that entails like anything that they want to do, any kind of pollution, destruction, um, you know, anywhere that they feel like they need to go to set up shop, or any place that they need to test, you know, missiles or equipment, or, you know, sonar or whatever it is, like they can do whatever they want. And yet they're, you know, they're doing climate change studies. Like there seems to be kind of a big disconnect in the fact that they're probably missing the very large point that the actual things that they're doing are the things that they're studying, like is causing climate change. So I wonder about that. I don't know. Has the military done any studies on its own carbon footprint? I'm curious. Lastly, very quickly, I'm just going to touch on this article about Ford will stop selling nearly all North American cars. Refocuses on only trucks and SUVs. That's interesting because as Ford pushes ahead to achieve its profitability target of 8% by 2020, a level that would once again place it ahead of Chrysler Fiat in the Detroit automaker profitability depth league tables, the company announced Thursday that it's shuttering the last of its U.S. sedan brands as it shifts its focus to international markets, trucks, and SUVs. It is a drastic move as the company will be phasing out sedan models that have long history with the company, including models like the recently revamped Ford Taurus. Oh, wow. Sorry, this is from Zero Hedge, and Zero Hedge notoriously locks up. The closures are expected to save Ford $25.5 billion by 2022. That's so bizarre, though. So they're going to just make SUVs and trucks. Awesome. Just the worst things for the environment. That's what that's what they're going to stay with. So I wonder if they're, you know, I wonder if okay, the company also reaffirmed that it will soon install hybrid electric powertrains on its F-150, Mustang, Explorer, Escape, and the upcoming Bronco. The turnaround comes as domestic sedans have led the drop-off in new car sales that has continued this year. The company will now focus exclusively on higher margin models. Very, very interesting. So they're going to quit making the Fiesta, the Focus, the C-Max, the Fusion, Taurus, and the Mustang. Is that right? It's likely Lincoln's sedans will also disappear, though this is not explicitly stated. I wouldn't think that they would stop selling Mustangs because I see so many of these dipshit people driving their muscle Mustangs. These wankers that think that they're in fucking Grand Theft Auto, like driving around. Bro, get out of my way. I got this Mustang. Sorry, I had a little bit of a little ragey moment there about people driving Mustangs. Hope I didn't offend anybody out there driving Mustangs, but you suck if you do. They're sucky cars. They're actually really shitty. I've driven them before, and they're terribly made cars. That's all I have for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I appreciate your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to donate to this channel, you can do so at the links below. I got some very kind donations over the last week or so, and I want to thank everybody who has contributed to this channel. It really, really helps. Hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.